When I was around 18, I had just graduated from high school and bought a new car as a graduation gift to myself. It was a used car, but it was still in great condition with plenty of mileage to get me from point A to point B. I remember enjoying the car so much that I even drove it around my town with friends and whatnot. Sometimes I'd have to go through many challenges in my life to the point where I'd take long night drives to ease my mind. Most people think that music or weed would help you calm down, but I found driving alone to be very much relaxing. Having that alone time to yourself to clear your mind was better than any music genre or drug. Out of context, my dad is a heavy drinker and would sometimes come home and start fights with my mom or I. This often results in me getting frustrated and going out on those late-night drives to ease myself. Needless to say, my family is extremely dysfunctional in many aspects. One night I had just gotten home from work to find both my parents arguing as always. Needing to get some air and wanting to remove myself, I hop in my car and drive around the town to clear my mind. I live in a small town in Upper Massachusetts, which is known to be one of the safest towns in the U.S. It was a quiet night and I'm driving down the road just admiring life itself when I see something in the middle of the road. I stop my car and I see out of all things a baby car seat sitting in the road. At first I thought that it could have been a broken baby seat that someone had just threw out, but it seemed too random. Who throws out a baby car seat out onto the road at 2 a.m.? Them. That being said, I step out of my car and begin to hear faint crying coming from it. At this point, I'm so confused as to what to do, as I've never been in a situation like this. Mind you, this was during the beginning of fall, so it got decently cold at night. I casually step toward the baby seat, and that's when the crying immediately stops. I ever so slowly remove the blanket and see that it wasn't a baby, but a doll. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach when I saw what I was looking at. As my mind created these thoughts and what this meant, I look to my left and see a black figure peer their head out from behind a tree. With the very small amount of light from my car, I was able to faintly see that this was because I was tired or because I was scared. But their face appeared to be contorted. Without hesitation, I get back in my car and drive around the baby seat and back home. I'd say I was out for a good hour or so, as when I got home, both my parents were asleep. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night, as my mind still couldn't process as to what I saw. I thought about going to the police about it, but I knew that whoever that was would have been gone if police had come. So, I'm a 25-year-old male and this happened just last year in the summer. I was taking a road trip from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Los Angeles, California. The reason for this trip was to visit my old friend from childhood who I hadn't seen in years. Moving away from one of your best friends is enough to make anyone feel lonely and sad. I'd only saw him once a year when I had time off from work, so this trip was very important to me. If I remember correctly, I was driving down a long stretch of road somewhere in Arizona when my car suddenly dies out of nowhere. Being rightfully pissed off, I hit my dashboard, trying to get the damn thing to start. Unfortunately, however, it's an old car, so I knew the chances of it starting up were slim. Eventually, I get out of my car and look underneath the hood. The car's battery had been covered in battery acid and it spread through the other components. I was stuck on an empty road in the middle of nowhere with nothing but desert and cliffs, so you could imagine the sheer panic I was in. I take out my phone to try to get a hold of Matt to see if he could come get me. When we were younger teens, we'd always have this little slogan when trying to reach each other. It went something along the lines of, "So and so, do you copy?" And I'd repeat the catchphrase, attempting to reach him. "Hey Matt, do you copy? I'm in a bit of a pickle here." However, signal around here was basically non-existent, so I had no other choice but to walk to the nearest town, 10 miles up ahead. All the while, I'm still trying to reach Matt, but there was no luck. About 15 minutes into my walk, I looked behind me and noticed two headlights and in the distance, getting closer and closer. It took me a second to realize it was a car and I flagged them down, practically begging for help. Believe it or not, it seemed as if my prayers came true as the car starts to slow down and pulls up next to me. Inside was an older-looking gentleman, and in the back were two younger men with a middle-aged woman wearing sunglasses in the middle seat. The two men seemed to be carrying her as she appeared to be asleep. The driver asked how they could be of help, and I explained my situation to them. One of the men in the back seat had said something about how that sounded like a you problem and that they'd be no help. I apologized, thanking them for their time, and I told them I'd be on my way. However, that's when I noticed the woman in the car. She looked slumped over and just appeared to be out of it. I then asked in a direct time to the driver, "Is everything all right with her?" He then looks at the man, looks at me and says, "Nah, she's dead, but why is that your concern?" One of the men in the back takes off her sunglasses, revealing her face. The second I saw her face, I could now see why she was deceased. Her lifeless body limped over the two men with her mouth hung open as if it had been broken. The driver then looks at me and says 6 words that have haunted me ever since. Calling the cops would be a mistake. I then back off and start running back to my car as the other car sped off until they were too far away to be seen. Thankfully, my car willingly started back up again, where I was able to go to the next town and get a new battery. I obviously did inform the police about my encounter and gave them an exact description of what the men looked like. Up until now, however, there have been unfortunately no leads as to who might have been responsible. In the end, I did get to see my friend and nothing had happened again while on that trip. I'm not sure what they were planning on doing, but I knew my life was in danger with whatever it was. The fact that I didn't bring a gun with me made me even more vulnerable for something to happen. The scariest thing about this whole thing was when the car drove past me where I was able to see the driver. He stared at me with this unnerving grin and kept it until he was far enough. That grin will forever be burned into the back of my head. I'm just glad I didn't get hurt or possibly have something potentially worse happen. There are truly some sick and twisted people in this world that we just have to live with. It's unfortunately a harsh reality of life. This took place in 2017 when my girlfriend and I were visiting her aunt in Seoul, South Korea. Her aunt always enjoyed big cities and the culture they had, even though it got tiring at times. Seoul was also a major hotspot for tourists, which meant that it was busy wherever you went. However, that didn't seem to bother her aunt that much. Anyway, we were staying at her apartment for about a week before we went back home. One night during our stay, my girlfriend and I decided that we'd go out for dinner for a little date night. I'm American, and my girlfriend is obviously Korean, so I wasn't familiar with the food, nor have I even tried it. She had recommended we go to this restaurant that served really good food along with popular dishes throughout Korea. The restaurant was located in the more rural parts of the city, which was about a 45-minute drive. That being said, we hop into her aunt's car and start driving to the location. Fast forward about 30 minutes or so later, I remember us driving by some small rice fields when my girlfriend notices something up ahead. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but we then came to the conclusion that it was a person. Because of the light from the moon, we can see that he's waving his arms up in an attempt to stop us. My girlfriend obviously stops, and he approaches the car while hyperventilating. In a very panicked voice, he starts saying things in Korean that I obviously didn't understand. She begins talking to him, and she translates by telling me that he had gotten lost on a hike. He had claimed that he needed a ride back to his town and asked us to help. Girlfriend, being the nice person she was, told him to hop in the back and that we'd drive him. We think nothing of it when we see what appeared to be two other people hiding in the tall grass. Now, I wasn't sure what my girlfriend heard, but she swore one of them said, "Oh shit," in Korean. This was clearly due to the fact that we had saw them, and the lights inside the car revealed his face to be bright red, as if he knew we were catching on to something. However, before he was able to do anything, my girlfriend pretends to be on the phone and makes up an excuse that we had to leave. His demeanor completely changed, as if he were disappointed. At that point, we weren't sure what was going to happen, but we didn't want to stick around. My girlfriend turns the car around and we drive off, not looking back. Right then, we knew that whatever their intentions weren't good and that we shouldn't stay there a second longer. Our dinner date was obviously canceled that night, but we never did tell her on about it. South Korea is known to be very safe, so the chances of something like this happening were rare. A month later, my girlfriend's aunt saw a news report of two people gone missing near the area where we saw them in. The news had said it was because the two were drunk and had spread out, but I've always wondered about that. I'm still not sure if what we encountered was some sort of ambush or trap or just people pulling some prank. Even with both of those scenarios in my head, I still feel that the second one is a bit too optimistic. I've never been back to Korea since, and neither has my girlfriend.